Hi all, welcome to week one. This is our intro to game design. I am your host today, Sarah Young. I am excited to get into the week's works with you. And this week we're going to kind of do an introduction on the material and kind of lay the basics of what you might want to know and need to know in the course. So without further ado, let's get started. Our agenda today is we're going to talk about several different subjects. First, we're going to discuss what are games, and then look a little bit about what is game design, how is that different than game development, and then kind of look at point you to a few keywords, and then talk about kind of overall closing, and I'll have a reference page for you for your future reference if you'd like to see some of the sources. So section one, again, we're going to talk about kind of what are games. Involved with that is we're going to look at theories and definitions of games, talk about why games are fun, and then look at how games kind of reflect real life, and then games are types of both are broad, and talk about analog and digital type games. So know that we're covering game design in its general terms. So we're looking at not necessarily game development, and we'll talk a little bit that at the end, where you're doing a lot more video games or computer programming and that type of thing. We're talking more about the general principles of a game, and what are games, and how we think about designing them, from board games, tabletop games, card games, sports games, and included our digital or video games. Yeah, it's a broad general survey of everything. So theorizing games. If you kind of look at the readings in your book, they argue there's a tentative explanation that a game is, at its most basic form, an activity with rules. A lot of games have similarities, but they don't have the same characteristics per se. Some of these characteristics that games often share are that a lot of times they involve conflict, either with other players or the game itself, or you have a lot of chance elements like randomness, fate, or luck. You're trying to you're trying to overcome these struggles to win your game. If you think about playing a board game, you're maybe perhaps racing other people, or trying to reach the end, or trying to find the murderer, or whatever type of game you have, or it's like a Pictionary. You're trying to draw the picture so your teammate can answer it. You're against other people. There's this kind of competitive competition about it. A lot of games have goals and things to do, but not necessarily always in all formats. There's can be you can play a campaign which has a lot of goals and things that you have to do, or you can also play a sandbox kind of mode and play around and have fun with what a game is doing. Most games have defined start and end points, but not all necessarily do. The readings mention World of Warcraft or Dungeons and Dragons oftentimes are kind of these ongoing games where you don't start one hour or 1 minute and be done in the next hour. So a lot of times also games involve decision making on the part of the players, or have like the strategy that players need to do, but that's not always the case. A lot of children's games, Candyland, Chutes or Letters, or things like that, where you don't get to make the decisions necessarily, other than you can choose not to play. you have to choose a card, like in Candyland, to move to the next spot, and so that's somewhat of a choice, but whatever the card says is what you do. There's not necessarily strategy to that. So another thing that's kind of difficult, I guess I'm trying to tell you all that, or show you all that, how difficult it is to say, like, this is a game. A lot of games do this, but they don't do. Not all games do. And here we're going to kind of come up to some definitions. There's even an idea that anyone who's tried to come up with an academic has even failed to encompass everything. And the fact is that if you try to encompass everything, you're most likely to fail, because again, games are so different. Some theorists have said that games are kind of voluntarily uncertain, unproductive things governed by rules and make-believe. And then other people have argued that it's kind of like a free activity outside of ordinary life. Other definitions say that a game is a kind of a rule-based formal system with variable and quantifiable outcomes, where different outcomes are assigned different values, where a player is kind of trying to change the outcome, and the player feels attached to the outcome, and consequences are often negotiable or optional, or not necessarily on Candyland, but you have a lot of times with trying to figure out what you're going to do next to win the game. Other ideas are that games are a subset of entertainment limited to conflicts that players work to foil each other's goals, and it's just kind of one of many type of things that children or adults try to use as a form of competition or play or challenge. Sid Meier, the designer of Civilization, gave a pretty popular definition that games are a series of meaningful choices. Or other designers have said they are, let me try to read this one or more casually linked series of challenges in a simulated environment. So they kind of add the simulation idea that this isn't necessarily, again, like real life occurring, but it's we try to recreate kind of the life things in a simulated way for fun. A definition that I like in one of the readings I often refer to say that games are just exceptionally tasty patterns to eat up. So that like the idea that we kind of do the same thing over and over, maybe in different ways, different choices, different strategies, or just different chances. You pull the Candyland card over and over to try to make it to your final wonderful Candyland. And so it's just kind of a series of patterns, But that I think I like that one, but maybe it's because he says it's a tasty pattern to eat up. But obviously there you could probably describe a lot of different pattern things as tasty patterns to meet up that aren't necessarily games. So, Drew Castiglia, who also teaches in the at the University of Arizona, mentions that there are certain things that games often have in common. Participants who take on roles, a codified set of rules for participants to follow, objectives that participants strive for, uncertain outcomes. Probably one of the more famous or well-known or well-cited individuals, the Johan Huizinga, says that the games have 5 different criteria. Kind of they're voluntary, they're rule-ordered, happens within kind of this fixed boundary of a magic circle. This idea of a magic circle will probably come up often because it's very popular in design, game design, and just you probably hear it a lot, but this magic circle is kind of the special place with agreed upon limited space and rules. So it's like we're playing we know we're playing a game because it's this time and place. It's very rhetorical, this magic circle, and again it's some postulate that it's different from ordinary life, or he says that's one of the criteria. And finally, the 5th criteria, I think it's useful to bring these up, but I'm not sure I agree with all these. So it's that the games are not useful or in material interests. So they're kind of like this extraneous thing that you can play. So those are kind of a lot of different definitions that you can see that people are trying to say what games are. But another important thing to add is that games are also fun. I don't think people would play them quite so much if they were a miserable experience that you feel like you were forced into doing. So while games, a lot of times to say or the definitions of games say, it's this series of patterns or, this controlled magic circle of space that's controlled by rules, it would be hard to say that rules are what defines a game. The Koster 21st 13 adds that, games that rigidly define rules and situations are kind of more susceptible to mathematical analysis, or these more strict logic puzzles, maybe, or just have their own mathematical limitations, which is a limitation in itself. So we have to think about, really, as designers, and as we begin to explore this course, is where we want to think about how games are not only like constrained by rules, but they also have to be fun. People have to want to play them. So an important rule then for game designers is that the more rigidly constructed and I guess the rigidly constructed and directional, or rules conformed, that the more limited your game would be. To make more lasting play and have players enjoy it, you need to kind of either integrate kind of problems we don't know that we have to solve, and these decisions, as we're going to talk about through the course of the semester, is that people enjoy making decisions, they enjoy feeling good about themselves, they enjoy a game. It has to be fun. Koster continues that fun is about feeling good. Like, we want our brains to feel good. Sometimes after I've worked all day on a computer, the last thing I want to do is go play a game on my computer again. But then I'll go and I'll start playing, and then I'll where it seemingly took days to get one day of work done. Sometimes a gaming experience, so I could spend hours doing a game, and it just feels like minutes. Sometimes I can't even start a game because I know that it's a time suck, and I will somehow I fall down this hole and never get back out until it's bedtime. So anyway, games are about feeling good, and having the release of chemicals in our brain that make us happy, or at least make us feel rewarded, or some type of good feeling. Ways that we can feel good is a sense of mastery. When we beat a game, or when we figure out how to jump on like a platforming game, or when you figure out how to do something. It also comes out of comprehension. When you figure out, you not only master like maybe the movement, but you have also figured out how to do that. So it's kind of like a physical in a way, and also like dexterity, but also like mentally you're able to figure something out, and cognitively rewarding. And if we're bored, or we're miserable, that's not a fun experience. So as a game designer, you want to create an experience that people like, and they want to spend time with, and about kind of helping the brain do new things and solve puzzles and solve challenges. So and I guess also we'll get into later in the semester, but some people game because they like the social interaction. So there's lots of different reasons people want to play games together. Researcher Rogers also notes, though, that the problem with saying that the goal of a game is fun is that fun is subjective. So I can think something's really fun, and you might think it's totally awful and not fun at all. So you can't just judge by fun. There has to be other, you have to think about a lot of different factors and variables, and what people like, and what they typically will put up with, as far as maybe glitches or things, or just what they do. So that's basically what we're going to talk about in this semester is, how do we design for fun, and what does fun mean, and what do games look like? And as we see in the little the images on the screen, these people playing a video game or computer console game seem to be really having fun, whether it's because just the game itself is a lot of fun, or they're enjoying the competition between each other, or they're just having fun with each other, the cooperation. Who knows if they're playing against each other, with each other, but they're smiling and look like they're having fun. But also, fun is subjective. The author Rogers in his little cartoon shows that we if it's as a testing a game out as a designer. A boss coming behind you, is it fun? I don't know yet. Maybe you don't think it's fun, don't know how to approach it. It's not fun. Fun is a balance. So we're going to learn about that. So quick polling question for you all. Why do you think games are fun? What would you say? Another thing is that, although a lot of the definitions of games stressed that games are this magic circle that don't take place in necessarily real world, G would also argue that players kind of feel aligned a lot of times with the character, especially in digital or video games or console games, where computer games, I'll just say digital games to kind of cover everything, mobile, console, video games. Players kind of feel in touch with the avatars and kind of mediate their experience, kind of thinking about themselves as an avatar or what it would be like to be the avatar. These avatars or characters are kind of important for us. But thinking about avatars and things and our bodies and things like that, Coster also adds games also seem abstracted from reality because these are really art patterns of our real world. They have more in common with how our brains visualize things when they do with how reality is formed. But we're looking at, when we're playing a game, we're looking at this larger system of what, probably a fantasy world or something, but a lot of times it will look like the worlds we already know. So they are familiar to us. And you could say that, games are a lot like the real world, but then you could also, on the flip side, say the real world is also like a game where you dress up in a costume. And that's what the picture's trying to show us, and how, who we are and what we do and how we present ourselves is often, how do we best present ourselves to our advantage? How do we, how are we winning at this game of life? The choices that you make, you have strategic decisions that you're making, a lot of times has to do with chance. So I guess the point of this slide is to think about game design also often helps us mediate our worlds, maybe be more successful in our game worlds than maybe in our real life, or just kind of lets us play out different characters or things that we are. So so there's directly a comparison between real life and real life and game life, and I think game life is part of real life because it's part of your real life. But anyway, the idea is that we should think about that when we're designing, that like, how does this mirror our life, and how does it advance maybe what we can do in the real world, and how can we improve on that experience to make us enjoy a game more. And if we're thinking about even chess as kind of like a play on real life, because we have these pawns, or the peasants are the most are the most numerous and disposable pieces of the game, and these noble bishops, knights, and rooks are most valuable, but lose if you still have another player. The valuable pieces are these royalty pieces, with whom it's difficult to without, you can't always beat the game. Anyway, so there's these ideas that we have crossovers between games and reality. So yeah, another point to make is that there are different types of games. Like I said, this is a game design class. It's not game programming. So if you don't be intimidated if you don't have a lot of computers or programming experience. This is mostly going to describe the kind of the rhetoric of the game world. What do people talk about when they do game design, when they're in a video game, or trying to think of not just video games but board games? Foosball is a game, Ultimate Frisbee is a game, board games, card games, Mancala, beer pong. These are all types of games that aren't digital and need that necessarily have a lot of programming to them. They talk about, I have a little, if you can see the table there, different types of game categories of what they could call analog are board games, card games, dice games, paper and pencil games, tabletop games, strategy games, tile-based games. So just different ways we could approach games. Sometimes the idea of analog versus digital is kind of not discredited, but it's not necessarily the most accurate description, because there could be digital elements of these analog type games, or you could play solitaire on a digital form, like my grandpa does. But the idea is to think about the different types of games and not just only focus on like digital video games or console games, computer games. So for these, yeah, you have the analog versus digital. The digital games are, could be mobile games, console games, computer games. You have like a word search that can be on in digital forms, and you have, you could play it on a TV, you could play it on a computer, you could play it on the console. Did I say? I think it said console. You can, do VR. So there's so many different types of digital games. I don't want to say only video games, because I don't know. It doesn't. If I say video games, I don't necessarily think of a mobile game when I say that. But if I say digital games, you can kind of get the gist of what I mean about games in the digital world. And they all kind of produce their own play style. Like I prefer Subnautica on the computer rather than like the Switch, just because I like the controls better. So like it's also important to think about how the medium that you're playing with, or like the device does affect the play experience. So. So the second part of the discussion this week moves beyond, the general idea of what are games to kind of what is game design. We're going to talk about game design is, ... and kind of look about different theories of it, different types of game design, looking closer at design itself, and then kind of looking at sample elements of design, and especially focusing on kind of these core elements. If you read literature on game design, you're going to see a lot of repeating terms, and also like this idea that there's these core things that keep a game together. So first, what is game design? Just kind of a quick definition from readings is that game design involves creating the content and rules of a game. Again, games range in all different types, but pretty much when you're designing a game, you're thinking of the content, the rules, and obviously you want to think about fun and things like that. And we're going to kind of talk about what might be termed as aesthetic and the feelings that a game makes you feel. But basically, when you're doing game design, you're creating these structures for people to play. So the next thing to talk about, as told by readings, is that there's at least 6 different types of design things, or types of design that go into making a game. There's world design, which is kind of involves creating this overall backstory where you get your setting and theme, kind of this high level idea of what the game is. A systems design also, I would say, kind of is this high level idea, and this is more technical, where you create the rules and maybe the mathematical patterns that underlie maybe chance elements, or abilities to win something, or the I don't know, the percentage that, or the probability that you would have if you did certain scenarios in the design. So the systems design, again, kind of world world systems. Content design involves creating characters, where you have like items, puzzles, missions, like maybe what makes up a game. After systems design is kind of like what's left after you strip everything away. And content, we're like adding the things in that people might want to, helps them engage more. Game writing, creates dialogue, text, or story in the world. And we'll talk about stories and if games need them, but it's interesting to kind of look at the different elements of what games are. Level design helps create the maps, objects, challenges in the maps. It's not necessarily limited to digital games, but a lot of times, like you can think of like, oh, this level is on a video game. Levels are like intrinsic to video games a lot of times, or different games. But you can level up in board games, and different rules might apply when you're playing maybe a tabletop game. After you get a certain prestige or whatever your game might be thinking, you can level up in games as well. And then user interface is creating the experience, how a player interacts with the game and gets information back from the game. So, like we'll talk later on in the semester about feedback. A player just, is as good as a game can be if they can't interact with it, or either digitally or on what it looks like on a game, digital form or an analog form. You have to have like the user want to play the game based on how they interact with that game, and a lot of times the feedback and encouragement to from the game itself kind of keeps the player motivated to playing. So. Our next quick polling question is, what type of game design sounds the most interesting to you? If you were tasked with becoming in charge of one of those elements, would you be interested in world design, system design, content design, level design, user interface? What appeals most to you? And just a point I'd like to point out to you is, the sample jobs that are available in game design. It's not just being a programmer. You can, do graphic design, sound design, especially, in digital games, narrative design, character designer, level designer. There's so many different types of jobs, and you can just Google on the interwebs about like different design. I will say that I have a acquaintance / old friend that's in a game developer, and his #1 advice to anyone trying to get into game design is also know how to program, because as much as the game design needs all types of different functions and different talents, being able to program helps you think like someone that can design a game, because if you don't have that programming experience, and we'll talk about this again later in the semesters, if you don't have the technical abilities, or you can't think like a programmer, you might suggest lots of ideas for a game that just won't technically work, because the realities of design or developing and programming a game aren't there with your ideas. So knowing how to code and being and knowing how to program are usually skills that they look for first, in a way. And there's also like the most amount of jobs available have to do with the programming skills. So just kind of food for thought. All right, so now we have like what is foundational in a game. If we're looking at game design, this is kind of like where we start thinking about what goes into this design. And books always put, the literature on game design always puts us in kind of maybe 6 different categories. The Brathwaite and Schreiber put us in 5. I kind of add these core literary elements just because I think other sources and resources talk a lot about these elements, and it deserves a little more attention. So we're going to talk about each one of these individually, but kind of as an overview. A core is kind of this single play experience that a designer is trying to convey. And again, we're going to talk about this in a minute. A core mechanic is kind of this the way that a character interacts with the game in particular often performs it repetitively. You know, sometimes the mechanic can be like a single action repeated over and over. Like if you're running in a foot race against someone else, you know, the core mechanic would be running. In a trivia game, you're going to be answering questions. In Donkey Kong, you kind of use the core mechanic is to kind of use this joystick to jump and maneuver a character on the screen. But also, oftentimes, you know, these mechanics can be kind of a lot of different actions that you're able to undertake. Like a first-person shooter, you kind of there's these interrelated elements like moving, aiming, firing, managing resources, making sure you don't get lost. You know, making sure that you have enough ammo or your armor is at full protection, or you know, you have as good as you can get, particularly in defense of a particular enemy that may or may not have a stronger weapon, some things like that. So there's a lot of different things you have to manage. The core dynamics on the other side are, you know, they're affected by the core mechanics, so it often gets very blurry when you're thinking about the distinctions between both of these, because dynamics are made of mechanics, but you know, if you keep reducing, I think, the elements down, then you find like the mechanics and the kind of the bare bones of what a game has. So you might have a hard time differentiating between dynamics and mechanics sometimes, just to kind of figure out what's being said. The authors, are Brathwaite and Schreiber, note though that, you know, if in the game design industry, if someone says a core, they're often talking about dynamics. And again, dynamics is this particular pattern of play that has to deal with the mechanics. So, you know, if I have the football example here. If you're thinking about, you know, the goal of mechanics of a football game is that, you know, you kind of move the ball down the field in particular ways. Dynamics is how those movements go in together, especially when facing the other team, and you have to, you know, think about the best way to move the ball, and you kind of, you know, strategies and different things are involved with these like dynamics. But we're going to talk a little bit more about later, so I don't want to dwell on this too much, but just think about dynamics are made of mechanics, and that it might be confusing as you do this. Core aesthetics, the core literary elements. Again, this one isn't necessarily on the in the book readings, but I often have people read, but it's in lots of literature on games, and it kind of has to do with like what is the theme, what is the tone, you know, what is the overall impression that you get, and that relates to the core aesthetics, because a core aesthetic is the player's experience and feel, and the way that a player kind of engages with the game. So it's important to think about not just you know, what the player does, but how the player feels and how they're engaged, especially if a game is supposed to be fun, and especially if you're designing a game for a company that wants to make money or wants people to learn something. You know, you have to think about that user experience element. Core statements are these related to the visual game, and are often written by like a design team to reflect the core mechanics and kind of sum up in a single sentence or a small document of what a game is. So we're going to kind of take a look at these. Again, a overall core is this kind of single play experience the designer is trying to convey. You know, I kind of see it as the sum of its whole parts, and what the game allows you to do, what it's supposed to be, the impressions now or in the future that it provides. Like, you know, what is this game supposed to be doing? Lynn from 2012 source thinks a useful way to think a little deeper about the gameplay experience is this concept of a game experience encompasses not just gameplay, but the total package of what the game is and what it affects, like effective. The game, its presentation, its style, its interaction with the community, the nature of the community itself, the game, all these kind of different spheres of reference that a game can impact, and has meaning on. So you're not necessarily just building a game. You might be building a brand. You might be building some type of community engagement. So anyway, so the overall core is kind of this, and play experience is this. You're trying to get the essence of a game and what it's trying to do. And again, it's kind of like the sum of its whole parts. So cores of game design, core mechanics. This is probably one of the more important slides that we talk about, and we'll hit it again next week, the idea of core mechanics and dynamics and aesthetics, just because it's such three kind of important concepts. Core mechanic, again, is that a way a character interacts with the game or achieves the goals, interacts with the dynamics, and particularly, performs it repetitively. We talked on the intro screen about what that could be, in trivia. It could be answering questions. In a foot race, it could be running. I have this little booklet from Super Mario, I think it was 3 or something. I think I don't remember what I picked now. But it's like there's certain things you can do in a game. You could run, you can jump, you can throw shells. If you're playing chess, you have particular piece movements and ways you can move the pieces. First-person shooter, you can, aim, fire, move. There's certain things that you can do in a game in order to interact with the game. Again, the definition is that, the core mechanic is the way the character interacts with the game. So if you can take that away as just like a snippet, soundbite of what a mechanic is, I think that's useful. Mechanics examples, I just kind of threw in a couple that you could look at. You could download the PowerPoint and look at it more at your own leisure, but we have kind of ideas about platforming. You can just kind of see that, there's different. I'm trying to get close to my computer because my eyesight's bad. So you have I'm trying to do my grandma voice because that's literally how my grandma talks. So, floating, moving, jumping, exploding, these kind of different mechanics of a game are kind of inform the way you interact as a player. And this was from Rogers, The Nuts and Bolts of Mechanics. Also, different mechanics, I'm not going to go through all of them, but same source kind of lists some ideas for you of like what are examples of mechanics. And I think a lot of times a definition is useful, but also like what it means in context or examples of those are also useful. So you can kind of go back and think of what you can see. A lot of things has to do with some of them are hazards, like how does the game try to trip you up, or like how can you interact, like pulling a lever. So there's a lot of range to what mechanics can mean and be. So hopefully that's useful. So the next area we have to look at is the cores of game design is in dynamics. And again, it's often tricky because, if dynamics are made of mechanics, where does the line stop when, a mechanic can be a dynamic and just, what is it? The examples they have in the book are territorial acquisition, prediction, spatial reasoning, survival, destruction, building, collecting, chasing or evading, trading, race to the end. And I think that's one way to look at dynamics, and as in kind of like more of a, I would call them even a genre theme, and that's kind of why I add in these like the core literary elements as well. But they do kind of inform, or it says that, sorry. The core dynamics as defined by them is affected by the mechanics and is the overall particular pattern of play. So, if we say territorial acquisition is a dynamic and a pattern of play, mining, fighting other armies, the ability to fight an army, the ability to have a gun, the ability to make strategies to engage war, that might be like the kind of the mechanics, the way that you try to make this pattern of play for the ultimate goal of acquiring more territory. So I don't want to say the dynamics are goals, but it can deal with goals in that you're kind of doing a pattern of play for something. But I also think it's useful to think about that dynamics are like I was talking about the football example, and kind of back to the main the definition they have here, that it's a particular pattern of play. You know, you have the mechanics, the bare bones way that you can interact with the game, and these dynamics are how you kind of can play around with the mechanics to kind of engage or use your strategy in order to reach the goal or objective of the game in general. So I kind of, in my head, say, you know, mechanics are the way you interact with the game at its most basic skeletal level, and the dynamics are, yeah, kind of the interaction between these mechanics and the goals and other players, and kind of all these other elements that have to deal with the workings of a game. You know, if you're trying to build a city, you know, what's the way that you can build the city? Like, you know, you can build buildings, you can build highways, you can build roads, but what's the most effective way to lay out a city? I know, like, I do a city builder, I'm always like, cram as many people as possible so we can make a lot of money. But my husband's more like, no, you have to build it out and make parks and make the people happy. So there's, you know, different ways to fulfill the goals. And, you know, yeah, racing, and, you know, this we have the territorial acquisition, yeah, the race at the end. This is kind of trying to talk about, you know, the different way in building. Like Minecraft a lot of times is like having to build things and work. Maybe don't have to, but I know that's why I enjoy Minecraft, is kind of building some of the things. But anyway, so we just have different cores and different ways that we interact with the games. So this is the cores of game design, the core story elements and cores. Elements and cores and dynamics, I think is useful because it's not necessarily mentioned in the Brathwaite and Schreiber piece, but I think a lot of we repetitively talk about kind of what is the theme of a game, what are the items being represented, you know, like kind of like this motif, like what you know, feeling are we trying to talk about, so, and what tone are we using. So I guess I just wanted to kind of introduce some of these terms more than anything, just so we can think about how they contribute to mechanics and dynamics of a game. So a theme is kind of an objective statement or idea that the plot revolves around. You know, a game theme can refer to a subject matter the game is built about. It can be abstract like shapes, or it could be story driven and have themes like mystery. You know, themes are great ways to find similar games, or think about subjects or the content that you actually want to put in. So you know, you can have a game that's built on humor or zombies or adventure. You know, that's why I think I wanted to put this, because, you know, the territorial acquisition kind of could border on a theme, but it's also a dynamic. So I just, you know, just want you to kind of be aware of kind of these ideas, and they're going to be kind of murky and muddy and kind of overlapping, but, you know, get the gist of the terms and language that's used in game design. And also think kind of also another good literary term that's often used, and there's quite a number of references and resources you can look up, is genre. It's a genre is a term for any category of kind of like a distinctive style or criteria, you know, but a theme is specifically what the story is about. So a theme is, genres can be made of themes. If, you know, there's a bunch of games about zombies, the theme of zombies then kind of becomes a genre of games. But so just kind of think about borrowing some maybe terms from English class, high school English class, and thinking about game design, because a lot of as much as games are technical and mathematical, they're also you know, story and storytelling as well. To kind of help define a few of the terms, a tone is the author or designer's feeling towards a theme, and you can kind of see an example there up front or on the slide. they were talking about tone is kind of the feelings or the atmosphere that the author set in the story, and a mood is kind of what a player or the story reader, but the player gets after playing it. So one is kind of top down, prescribed by a designer, and then the mood is kind of what the player gets, and that kind of builds on aesthetics that we talk about, and kind of how a player feels. So yeah, the mood is kind of the emotional and experiential feel of the game resulting from that tone, and a motif is the setting or kind of the universe that a game's story belongs to. Yeah, to me, these are kind of the basic storytelling elements that inform overall goals of the game and help you join with other cores to create a player experience. And it's important to understand maybe theme and genre, because if you want to design a zombie game, and you at least have to be cognizant of the other zombie games that are in existence, because people have certain expectations once games they start seeing genres of games. You don't necessarily have to say I have to build this game like X game because everybody liked this game, but you at least have to be aware of what's going on and the type of genre and how you would want to improve or maybe change different elements that other games in the genre typically have. I find that the core aesthetics are really important, because the way that game design often talks about aesthetics is I wouldn't say very, I guess not very different, but it is different, markedly different than what I generally understand as aesthetics, especially in a pop culture kind of way. I don't know if you all have aesthetics often to me and academically has to do with the way something looks and the maybe the feeling that it gives off, and I guess that the feeling is kind of what we want to focus on. But aesthetics, a lot of time we think of what is beauty, it's a central question of the idea of aesthetics, and we're not necessarily thinking aesthetics in game design isn't just what is pretty and what is beauty, and we can start seeing that in this I was trying to look up Googled different aesthetics, and the dark academia, fashion has a lot of different ideas of aesthetics. There's this dark academic or cottagecore, or I don't know, emo kid. You have to Google it yourself, but this idea in fashion is that aesthetics are the way the kind of pieces people choose, the colors people choose, and a lot of it has to do with way someone looks, but also if you think about this is it makes you also as an onlooker or a person that would be dressing that way feel a certain way. So it's also a feeling, and that's again what we get with aesthetics. The idea, and we'll talk a lot about this next week, is that the aesthetics or the way a game makes you feel is very important, and often we describe that as in fun. We want to feel like we're having fun, but fun isn't the only thing, and so how do we talk about aesthetics? So the idea of a feeling is tied to this idea of aesthetics. So there's one common Hinkle and LeBlanc have a kind of a famous piece that talk about the aesthetics, MDA, mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics design process. And again, they were motivated by the idea that we can't just say we want to have fun. What does it mean? So mechanics in their terms are the rules of a game. The dynamics is the overall system or the ways of play and patterns, and then the presentation has to do with aesthetics, but also the feeling, the desired emotional response that a game is wanting to make. That could be something different types of aesthetics that were illustrated, or you want to have someone have a sense of pleasure, they want a sense of fantasy, they want a sense of drama, obstacles, fellowship, discovery. I think those are very overall vague, and I think we've gone a lot further than the original ideas that those 8 different types of aesthetics that we thought about, but you can see they're different than just fashion aesthetics. So the idea, and we'll talk about it next week, is that aesthetics have to do with the way that the desirable emotional response is invoked in a player when they interact with the game system. And then finally, core statements. These are kind of more paperwork related. That, you know, maybe if you think back about the number one, the overall core, a core, like what is the general idea of a game? A core statement would be like a physical deliverable document that kind of describes this. And we'll talk about this later as well, kind of the paperwork of a game. But you know, like could be one sheets or large documents of game design. It's the way that it's this core statements are related to the vision of the game and usually written by a development team to reflect the core mechanics or the core dynamic and sum up what the game is about, often in a single sentence or a small document. So this core statement is you have to be able, or the idea is that you have to be able to summarize your game and make it a kind of something that you can tell other people about. You know, how do you know you want to play a game? Is you can kind of think about it, or how do you know you want to sell a game? Is you think about it in terms of what it is. And if you can't, as a designer, if you can't describe what your game is, then oftentimes you won't have an audience in which to sell that game to. Genres of games, I kind of just wanted to hit this a little bit more because I was talking about, a zombie game, but here's different types of games. You have action, adventure, maybe role-playing games, shooter games, adventure games, platform games. So I just kind of pulled an image online, and I thought it'd be useful for you all to look at and kind of think about like what kind of games do you like to playing. So quick polling question is, you know, looking back at the list here, you know, what kind of what is your favorite kind of game genre based off this list? Maybe your favorite genre isn't on this list, but hey, pick one that you enjoy on the list more than others. So our next category is you know, characteristics of good game designers. So we talked about, you know, kind of what makes a good game. I also want to talk about what makes a good game designer. And these kind of will move quicker. So a good game designer is player-centric in that they can create goals with the player and the player experience in mind. This could be a major stumbling block for some of you who are so focused on what you like in a game that you forget that you're not making necessarily a game for yourself, but a game for others. So you have to kind of think about this human-centered design process. If you've never taken a design course, it might be useful to think about, you know, like, you know, video game design as an art, and you know, maybe some human-centered design courses or something like that, to think about how do you know what your player wants, and how do you design for that and design that interactive moment for that. You also need to have meaningful decisions. We'll kind of talk about this throughout the semester. You know, players are motivated to participate and finish if they think that the decision that they're making is meaningful and makes sense. Being an informed designer is also an important element of game design. You know, you need to know playing games. You need to kind of network with others professionally. You know, go to conferences or you know, network with you know, different agencies that you might want to work in. It's useful to reach out to different people to see what they are doing and how they, you know, maybe forged a path in game design. Think again back to my friend's advice for new game designers is know what you're doing, because if you just say, hey, I want to go in and make game design, or I want to do game development, you know, what does that mean? You know, as we've talked about, there's so many niche areas in game design that you need a portfolio that represents something and something well. You know, maybe you do a lot of levels, you know, so develop levels, or maybe you have sound, you know, develop a portfolio of sound. So anyway, being an informed designer means networking with others and thinking about your role, I guess, in game design, but also playing games and knowing what it means to have a game. Look for game ideas in everything as well. You know, think about just how an everyday life occurrence you think about how life is a game. I think if we start being a little more playful to life in general, then I think it becomes easier to think about how we could make enjoyable games or replicable life activities that might be more fun and rewarding. And make a conscious effort to learn about the terms, concepts, practices, and procedures of game design. And I would say game development, even though this isn't a game development class, but if you're serious about going into maybe a more structured industry position, especially with digital games, think about knowing all the things or the language of the worlds that you might be trying to enter, particularly coding if you want to do game development, just because, like I said, knowing how the games work is often a useful for future employers. Other thing is games are iterative in that you have to keep play testing. So you put a game out, you try it, you see what works, you do, I don't want to say focus groups, but yeah, you ask people what they think of your game. You do kind of rapid prototypes where you quickly do something, test it, get it back, and keep trying to refine it and make it better. Play testing things by having others come in and test it and yourself. Keep revising that game. Your first iteration is never going to be right. So when I have you do weekly game design things, I want you to talk to friends and family and see what they say, because they're going to have a comment on it and maybe make it better or figure out a spot that doesn't work for them. So iterative or going different iterations of something is essential for game design. You have to revise, you have to repeat, you have to do this over and over. And then finally, most times you're going to be working within constraints, whether it be budget, time, like timing, completion of a game getting finished, or timing for a release, like when is the best time to release a game to the market? Is it Christmas time? I don't know. If you're making something about bunnies, maybe Easter is a good time. Just think about the timing. You also have to think about the platform you're going to use. As far as constraints, the audience, what are the audience expecting, what can you do within the ratings that you're going. If you're going to do a bunch of cursing, don't put it on a kid's game. Like what are the genre category expectations, what are the studio's expectations. As much as you probably want to make the game of your dreams, you also have to understand that your dreams are going to be constrained by whoever you're working for and whatever job in particular that you're doing. Maybe you can work yourself up to being to having more say in as far as design and development, but especially starting out, you're most often going to be constrained by a lot of things, and you're going to help kind of use your artistic abilities, but also be involved in someone else's visions, likely in a regular basis. Game design is very collaborative as well, so you're going to have to work with other people to carry out goals. There's also styles of design, as far as if you're thinking about how do I start thinking of a game and what do I want to do. So this is kind of a side point. It's not necessarily important, but also helps me think of my own research, like when I have an idea for a project. This blue sky design idea is that designers design with lots of possibilities and only kind of limited by maybe time, money, or interest. But most times designers are going to be working under constraints, but the blue sky idea is kind of what's the sky's the limit idea. A slow boil type of style of design is this kind of long-term thing where you maybe have an idea for something, you write down an idea, you come back to it. I have a lot of scratch papers and napkins that I have. I think a lot of my ideas are slow boil, and I eventually kind of get them out there. But it's this long-term kind of design idea that you think of an idea and work on it periodically, but maybe not the first thing that you're thinking of when you're on your day-to-day work schedule. Mechanic-driven design involves focusing on particular mechanics, like Super Mario Brothers, which often has this like platformer. It's often driven by platforms and jumping and what you can and can't do. So and that's influenced a lot of games since then. So we see a lot of I don't know, a lot of times I feel like it's Mario-like. I'll even use that as like a description. Again, MDA is this process we're going to learn about next week, which is mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, where you kind of think about this emotional response and then you kind of tweak the mechanics and the dynamics of a game in hopes that you will reach a certain effective response. Other ideas are intellectual property, which is building a game from pre-existing intellectual property. Like you get on a Spider-Man project, your kind of the style that you use to design is going to be limited by what you know about Spider-Man, what you know about the studios, what they'll let you do with that character. Sometimes games are based on stories, like a book or something like that, and then other time research or game design is kind of based on research, or maybe serious games or other types of genres that are kind of based on informing an audience about a particular thing. Games that we'll just explore later are kind of puzzles, chance, strategy and skill, chance and skill, Twitch, and then maybe serious games and kind of video games, or digital games, I should say. So just kind of, this slide is just to kind of show you what's coming. And also just a quick slide about game development. Again, this is a game design class where we are talking about design ranging from analog, you're running a foot race, to maybe a more digital type of design, but know that game development is more about, has a lot more technical issues. So yeah, like when we're actually developing a game, we're not just, obviously it's not just design is very important, but we're going beyond the design's ideas and actually trying to get it produced and develop this idea. So we have a lot more business type ideas kind of thrown in with game development, and also especially the programming and getting like the ideas into a publishable and out there position. The different little, if you Google game design, you can get a lot of different steps of game design. Like this one in particular talks about prototyping, progress, shipping, watching, repeating. Also planning, pre-production, production, testing, pre-launching, launching. You can see that testing just to remind you back to the iterative essence of game design. Anyway, so just kind of the last sentence of this little top thing he talks about, while game designers are involved in the creative aspects of making a game developers or programmers are responsible for the actual coding and technical aspects of putting a game together. So I just kind of think in terms of what we're talking about, and there's other courses you can take that talk more about game development, but again, this is more design based and thinking about like the choices that we have to make a design, and then what we would need to produce it is kind of the game development type matters. So quick polling question, are you planning to take future classes or focus more on game development and programming? Just curious of what everybody is interested in. And then finally, section 4, we just have some common terms. I just want to point everyone's attention to D2L, and the book has a lot of different definitions that are useful for you all to go back to. So I just want to draw your attention. I'm not going to go through these right now, but know that you can go to D2L at any time and look at key terms for this class, especially like this mechanics and dynamics might be the trickiest two definitions that you'll have to grapple with all semester. And again, I'll tell you, I've told you kind of what my idea is that mechanics are, how you interact with the game, and dynamics are kind of like the taking into account of everything and how the mechanics play against each other and play against other players. Anyway, but it's up to you to kind of make a definition for yourself that you could work with as you progress through your studies. But these definitions will be there for you to go back to. So summary, games are fun activities with rules and come in various forms, either analog, digital, have different appearances, themes, cores. Game design involves kind of creating the content and rules of the game, and takes a team of people to do that. Don't think you're going to be designing something by yourself. you will, have probably autonomy to work in self-contained ways, but also you will be contributing to a larger project. Games have cores where mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics and statements. And good design involves kind of, designers iteratively creating this world where players make meaningful decisions, and the constraints of the design requirements are kind of meet expectations, where you kind of, and players enjoy playing what you've created. Design styles can depend on the freedom that you have. The styles are probably going to be dependent on who you work for and what your objectives are and who your audience is. So always think in terms of constraints. And game design is only part of developing a game, and we have a lot of game development and other players that are involved in working on a game in general. So there's my references, and I wanted to close and say thank you for spending time with me for week 1, and hopefully this sets a good foundation for your overall experience in the class. Thank you.